I was already in the surgical gown, lying on the cold operating table under the blinding white light. The anesthesiologist was adjusting the IV drip. I could hear the nurse preparing the syringe. My heart pounded against my chest like a drum, not from fear of surgery, but because I knew something was wrong. They told me I was the only match for the transplant. They said I owed him, that he gave me this job, that I wouldn't be where I am without him. "You're not doing this out of kindness," the HR director snapped. "You're doing it because it's your duty." They never asked how I felt. They never wondered why my boss had collapsed. They never cared that I was trembling, suffocating, on the verge of giving a part of my body, for a man who used to make me cry behind locked doors. But just as the surgeon was about to lower the anesthesia mask over my face, the doors burst open. Jake Madsen, my boss's son, stormed in, breathless, eyes wide with terror. "Wait!" he screamed. "Stop everything!" The whole room froze. Jake looked straight at me, then at the surgeons. Should I finally tell everyone why my father really needs Vanessa's kidney? Or do I stay silent and let her be butchered? For a lie, Everstone Memorial Hospital stood like a glass monument against the Greenville skyline, all shining windows and pristine white walls. I remember the first time I walked through those automatic doors 5 years ago, clutching my resume like it was a life preserver. In many ways it was. Vanessa Brooks? The receptionist had called my name with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Dillard will see you now." Stephen Dillard, director of administration at Everstone Memorial, had a corner office on the 12th floor, with views that stretched across the entire city. He was in his 50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of getting exactly what you want. "Foster care, he'd said, skimming my resume during that first interview. "No family connections in healthcare? No college fund from mommy and daddy?" His eyes had flickered with something between pity and satisfaction. "Well, we all have to start somewhere." I got the job as his administrative assistant that day. I still remember how he shook my hand, his grip uncomfortably tight. "I'm taking a chance on you, Vanessa." Not many people would. For the first year, I was pathetically grateful. I worked 60-hour weeks, answered midnight emails, and memorized how he liked his coffee, black with exactly 1 sugar cube that had to dissolve completely before serving. I learned to anticipate his moods by the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. I perfected the art of making myself invisible when he was angry, which was often. "You understand?" "Me," he'd say sometimes, when we were alone in his office after everyone else had gone home. "That's why we work so well together. We're both outsiders who had to fight for everything." But Stephen Dillard hadn't fought for anything in his life. His father had founded the hospital. His path had been paved in gold from birth. The truth revealed itself slowly, like a disease that shows its symptoms, one by one. The way he'd place his hand on the small of my back during meetings just a second too long. The way he'd call me into his office to review reports, only to spend an hour telling me about his marital problems. The way he'd remind me, again and again, "You wouldn't be here without me, Vanessa. Remember that. You need to set boundaries." My friend May from radiology had warned me over lunch one day. "He's grooming you." I'd nearly choked on my salad. It's not like that. But wasn't it? The expensive birthday gift, just a token of appreciation. The insistence that I accompany him to fundraising galas. "You need to learn how networking works, Vanessa." The subtle reminders that my performance reviews went through him, and only him. "I'm fine," I'd insist to May, to myself. "I can handle it." Then I met Jake. It happened in the hospital cafeteria, 3 years into my tenure at Everstone. I was balancing 2 coffee cups and a stack of folders when someone bumped into me from behind. Coffee splashed across my white blouse, and the folders scattered like autumn leaves. "I'm so sorry," a deep voice said, and strong hands were already gathering my papers. That was completely my fault. He had Stephen's height and jawline, but everything else about him was different. Warm brown eyes instead of cold blue, dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, a smile that showed actual remorse. "Jake Madsen," he introduced himself, handing me back the folders. "And you are—" "Vanessa Brooks," I replied, suddenly conscious of the coffee stain spreading across my chest. "I work for your father." His smile faltered slightly. "Ah, my condolences." I'd laughed before I could stop myself, then immediately glanced around to make sure no one had heard me. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Jake said quietly. "I know exactly what he's like. I learned that Jake had been estranged from his father for years. He'd left Greenville after high school to study environmental law in California and had only returned because his mother, Steven's ex-wife, was battling cancer. "I'm staying at her place while she undergoes treatment," he explained when we met for coffee the following week. An actual planned coffee, not a random collision. "Dad doesn't know I'm back in town yet." "He never mentions you," I admitted. Jake shrugged. "I'm not surprised. I'm the disappointment who refused to join the family business." Over the next few months, Jake and I developed a friendship that existed entirely outside the hospital walls. We'd meet at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from Everstone, or walk through Cleveland Park on weekends talking about books or films or his environmental cases. He never asked me for information about his father, and I never offered any. But one evening, as we shared a plate of truffle fries at a downtown gastropub, Jake looked at me with unusual seriousness. "You know you don't owe him anything, right?" he said abruptly. I stiffened. "What do you mean?" "My father. The way he treats you." Jake's fingers tapped nervously against his beer glass. "May told me some things." "May should mind her own business," I snapped, feeling betrayed. "She's worried about you." "So am I." He leaned forward. "Look, I grew up watching him manipulate people. He finds their weaknesses and exploits them. With you, it's your lack of family support, isn't it? He makes you feel like you should be grateful to him." I stared at my half-eaten fries, suddenly not hungry. "You don't understand. He gave me a chance when no one else would." Did he? Or did he hire someone talented who he knew would work twice as hard for half the recognition because she had no safety net? Jake's voice was gentle but insistent. "Vanessa, you earned that job. You keep earning it every day. You don't owe him your dignity." I didn't respond, but his words lingered with me that night as I lay awake in my small apartment on the east side of Greenville. The truth was, I'd started to dread going to work. Steven's demands had become increasingly personal, his mood swings more volatile. Just last week, he'd thrown a stapler across the room because I'd scheduled a meeting for 9 a.m. instead of 9:30. "Are you trying to sabotage me?" he'd hissed, closing the door to his office so no one could hear. "Or are you just incompetent?" I'd apologized profusely, fighting back tears. Later that same day, he'd brought me an expensive box of chocolates. "I shouldn't have lost my temper," he'd said, not quite apologizing. "You just push my buttons sometimes, Vanessa. You know how much pressure I'm under." The pattern was always the same. Rage, followed by generosity. Criticism, followed by praise. Push and pull, again and again, until I no longer trusted my own perceptions. Was Jake right? Had I been allowing myself to be manipulated all this time? I didn't have long to consider this question. Because 3 days after my conversation with Jake, everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning board meeting. Steven was presenting the quarterly budget when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. I watched from my seat against the wall as his face drained of color. He gripped the edge of the conference table, knuckles white. "Steven?" Dr. Patel, the chief of surgery, stood up in alarm. "Are you all right?" He wasn't. Steven Dillard, my boss, my tormentor, my self-proclaimed savior, collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor of conference room A. And that's when the nightmare truly began. Acute kidney failure, Dr. Patel explained to the hastily assembled department heads. We were crammed into a small consultation room, the smell of antiseptic stinging my nostrils. "We've stabilized him for now, but the damage is severe." I stood in the corner, taking notes as always, though no one had explicitly asked me to be there. Force of habit, perhaps. Or maybe I just didn't know what else to do with myself. "What's the prognosis?" asked Margaret Winters, the stern-faced HR director who had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt. "Without a transplant, his quality of life will deteriorate rapidly," Dr. Patel replied. "Dialysis can manage the symptoms temporarily, but given the extent of the damage..." The room fell silent. I kept my head down, pen poised over my notepad, trying to appear professional while my mind raced. Should I feel guilty for the tiny spark of relief I felt? The realization that, for at least a few weeks, I wouldn't have to walk on eggshells around Steven's unpredictable moods? "We'll need to test family members for compatibility," Dr. Patel continued. "Does anyone know if his son is in town?" I said before I could stop myself. All eyes turned to me. "Jake, he's staying with his mother." Margaret's penciled eyebrows shot up. "And how exactly do you know this, Vanessa?" I felt a flush creep up my neck. "He mentioned it," I mumbled, immediately regretting speaking up. I didn't want to expose my friendship with Jake. especially not to Margaret, who reported everything back to Stephen. Well, that's a start, Dr. Patel nodded. We'll need to contact him immediately. And we should test other close relatives as well. What about staff? Margaret asked suddenly. We could organize a hospital-wide testing drive. Show solidarity. My stomach clenched. There was something calculating in Margaret's voice that made me deeply uncomfortable. Dr. Patel looked uncertain. It's not standard protocol to test non-family members first, and there are ethical considerations about testing employees due to the power dynamics involved. This is Stephen Dillard we're talking about, Margaret interrupted. The man who built this hospital into what it is today. I think we can make an exception to protocol. I bit my tongue. Stephen hadn't built anything. He'd inherited his position from his father and maintained it through political connections and intimidation. But this wasn't the time or place to point that out. The testing began the following day. A memo went out hospital-wide, phrased as a voluntary opportunity to help our beloved Director of Administration in his time of need. The subtext was clear to everyone. Your cooperation will be noted. Your lack of cooperation will be noted as well. I joined the line of employees outside the lab, telling myself I was just being pragmatic. The chances of me being a match were astronomically low. This was just a way to avoid raising suspicion. 3 days later, Margaret Winters called me into her office. Close the door, she said, not looking up from her computer screen. I did as instructed, then stood awkwardly in front of her desk. Margaret's office was meticulously organized, not a paper out of place. A framed photograph of her shaking hands with the governor was prominently displayed on the wall. You're a match, she said finally, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. What? I stammered, certain I'd misheard her. A perfect match, actually. 6 out of 6 HLA antigens. She slid a folder across the desk. The odds are remarkable. Almost providential, wouldn't you say? I stared at the folder but didn't touch it. This couldn't be right. The statistics were overwhelming against such a perfect match between unrelated individuals. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No mistake. Margaret's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. Dr. Walker confirmed the results personally. Dr. Walker was Stephen's personal physician and golf buddy. My unease deepened. What happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Now, Margaret said, folding her hands on the desk. You do the right thing. The only thing. You save the man who saved you. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of medical consultations, consent forms, and not-so-subtle pressure. Dr. Walker explained the procedure in clinical terms that somehow glossed over the risks to me while emphasizing the benefits to Stephen. The hospital chaplain stopped by my desk to tell me what a blessed opportunity I'd been given to serve. Margaret arranged for me to visit Stephen in his private room. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital gown and the machinery surrounding him, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Vanessa, he said, reaching for my hand. His skin was cool and dry. My guardian angel. I forced myself to smile. How are you feeling, sir? Better, knowing you're going to help me. His fingers tightened around mine. I always knew you were special, from the moment I hired you. I haven't actually agreed yet, I said quietly, attempting to reclaim some agency in this runaway train of a situation. I'm still considering everything. Something flashed across his face. Anger? Fear? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Of course, he said smoothly. It's a big decision. But Vanessa, he paused, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. I hope you'll remember everything we've been to each other. Everything I've done for you. I left his room feeling nauseated, and it had nothing to do with my kidneys. I tried calling Jake multiple times, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I'd later learned that he was at the courthouse in Charleston, fighting an emergency injunction on a water contamination case. But in that moment, I felt utterly alone. The pressure mounted. Margaret happened to mention that my lease renewal for the hospital-subsidized apartment building might be complicated if I didn't demonstrate appropriate loyalty to the institution. Dr. Walker emphasized how simple the procedure was for me, while dialysis would be so debilitating for Stephen. Even my co-workers, sensing which way the wind was blowing, began to distance themselves. May was the only one who dared to speak honestly. This is messed up, Vanessa, she hissed as we stood in line at the cafeteria. They can't force you to donate an organ. They're not forcing me, I said automatically, then paused. Wasn't that exactly what they were doing? I don't know what else to do. Say no! May's eyes flashed with anger. Tell them to find another donor. Tell them to put him on the national registry like everyone else. But it wasn't that simple. My entire life was entangled with Everstone Memorial. My job, my apartment, my healthcare, my professional references. Stephen controlled it all, directly or indirectly. And now, somehow, he needed my kidney. The surgery was scheduled for July 15th, just 3 weeks after Stephen's collapse. I signed the consent forms with a trembling hand, telling myself I was being compassionate, that I was doing the right thing. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was surrendering to fear. The night before the surgery, alone in my apartment, I finally broke down. I sat on my bathroom floor and sobbed until my throat was raw, until there were no tears left. Then I pulled myself together, packed a small overnight bag for the hospital, and tried to sleep. Morning came too soon. I arrived at Everstone at 5:30 a.m. as instructed and was immediately whisked through. Pre-op procedures, blood tests, vital signs, hospital gown, surgical markings on my abdomen, everything happening to me rather than with me. And then I was there, on the table, under the lights, the anesthesiologist adjusting the IV drip, the nurse preparing the syringe, my heart pounding against my chest. Just relax, Dr. Walker said, his voice muffled behind his surgical mask. When you wake up, this will all be over. The mask was lowering toward my face when the doors burst open. Jake Madsen stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and breathless. Wait, he shouted. Stop everything. The surgical team froze. Jake looked straight at me, then at the surgeons. Should I finally tell everyone why my father really needs Vanessa's kidney, or do I stay silent and let her be butchered for a lie? The operating room erupted in chaos. Dr. Walker stepped forward, his face flushing red beneath his surgical mask. This is outrageous. Security, he bellowed. But Jake held his ground, clutching a manila folder in his trembling hands. Go ahead, call security, Jake challenged, his voice steadier now. Call the police too while you're at it. I'm sure they'd be very interested in these documents. The anesthesiologist had frozen, the mask still suspended inches from my face. I pushed it away with a shaking hand and struggled to sit up on the cold operating table. Jake, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the commotion. What's happening? Dr. Patel, who had entered the operating room behind Jake, raised both hands. Everyone calm down. This is a sterile environment and we have a, patient prepped for surgery. A patient who's being manipulated into a potentially life-threatening procedure under false pretenses, Jake countered, stepping closer to my table. His eyes met mine, full of apology and determination. Vanessa, I'm so sorry I couldn't get here sooner. I've been gathering evidence. Margaret Winters burst through the door then, her normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. What is the meaning of this interruption? Mr. Madsen, you have no authority to be in this operating room. This is a gross violation of hospital protocol and patient privacy. Jake let out a bitter laugh. That's rich coming from you, Margaret. Should we talk about violations, like coercing an employee into organ donation or falsifying compatibility test results? The room went still. I felt the blood drain from my face. Falsifying? What? I managed to say. Jake opened the folder and pulled out several papers. These are your actual compatibility test results, Vanessa. I had to call in several favors from an old friend at the National Transplant Registry to get them. You're not a match for my father. Not even close. Dr. Patel stepped forward. Professional. Curiosity overriding the tension in the room. May I see those? He asked, extending his hand. Jake handed him the documents. Dr. Patel scanned them quickly, his expression growing increasingly grave. These indicate significant incompatibility, he confirmed, looking up at me with shock. This procedure would have had an extremely high risk of rejection. Ms. Brooks would have undergone major surgery for nothing. Worse than nothing. It could have endangered both patients. I felt sick, the room spinning around me. But Dr. Walker said what my father told him to say. Jake interrupted gently, just like he's been doing for years. Dr. Walker sputtered. These accusations are preposterous. I reviewed the tests myself. Did you? Jake challenged. Or did you just sign off on the reports Margaret prepared? He turned to Dr. Patel. My father doesn't even need an immediate transplant. His condition is manageable with medication and dialysis. The urgency was fabricated. Margaret stepped forward, her voice cold. You have no medical training, Mr. Madsen. You're simply a disgruntled son trying to undermine your father's care out of some twisted resentment. That's where you're wrong, Jake replied, pulling out another document. I have a sworn affidavit from Dr. Lena Keller, a nephrologist from Mayo Clinic, who reviewed my father's actual medical records. Records that, interestingly, differ significantly from the ones in the Everstone system. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Dr. Patel took the affidavit, read it carefully, then looked up with an expression of professional outrage. If this is accurate, someone has committed serious medical fraud, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, and potentially put Ms. Brooks at significant risk. I found my voice at last. Why? Why would they do this? Jake moved to my side, gently helping me sit up more comfortably. It's not about medical necessity, Vanessa. It's about the Lazarus trial. The experimental drug trial? Dr. Patel asked, his brow furrowing. Your father is on the oversight committee for that. He's more than on the committee, Jake explained. He's personally invested millions in the pharmaceutical company behind it. The final phase of the trial requires patients with specific medical profiles, including those who've undergone successful organ transplants. The company is on the verge of FDA approval, which would multiply my father's investment tenfold. I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water. So I was just, what, a means to an end? A way for him to qualify for the trial and cash in? Jake nodded grimly. That's exactly it. And you were perfect. Isolated. Dependent on him professionally. No powerful family to ask uncomfortable questions. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp with contempt. This is all speculation and hearsay. Ms. Brooks signed the consent forms willingly. No one forced her. Coercion doesn't always involve physical force, Margaret, Jake replied evenly. Sometimes it's about creating an environment where someone believes they have no choice. I closed my eyes. Memories flooding back. The apartment lease. Suddenly in jeopardy. The veiled threats about my professional future. The constant reminders of my debt to Stephen. The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. I want to see Stephen, I said, opening my eyes with newfound resolve. Now. Dr. Patel hesitated. Ms. Brooks, you're prepped for surgery. While it appears this procedure won't be taking place, you should rest and... Now, I repeated, more firmly this time. I need to hear him say it. Jake helped me off the table, draping a hospital robe over my surgical gown. Dr. Patel, after a moment's consideration, nodded. I'll accompany you. This situation requires immediate administrative attention. Margaret moved to block the door. This is highly irregular. Mr. Dillard is resting in preparation for his own part in the procedure. Move aside, Margaret, Dr. Patel said quietly, or I will call hospital security myself. The walk to Stephen's private room was surreal. Hospital staff stared as our strange procession moved through the corridors. Me in my surgical gown and robe, Jake supporting my arm, Dr. Patel and Dr. Walker following tensely behind, and Margaret striding ahead, already on her phone in what seemed like damage control mode. Stephen was sitting up in bed, scrolling through his tablet when we entered. He looked startled by our appearance, then quickly composed himself. Vanessa, what's going on? Why aren't you in surgery? His eyes narrowed when he saw Jake. What is he doing here? I stepped forward, feeling stronger with each passing moment. The fear that had paralyzed me for weeks was transforming into something else. Clarity, purpose, righteous anger. Is it true? I asked simply. Was any of it true? Stephen's eyes darted between the faces in the room, calculating. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake stepped forward. We know about the falsified test results, Dad. We know about your investment in the Lazarus trial. We know everything. For a moment, Stephen's mask slipped, and I saw naked panic in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, confident expression I'd come to know so well. Jake has always had an overactive imagination, he said, addressing Dr. Patel rather than me, and a tendency to dramatize things. Whatever he's told you, save it, I interrupted, surprising even myself with my boldness. I've seen the evidence. What I want to know is why. Why me? Stephen looked at me then. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time. His smile was almost sad. Because you were perfect, Vanessa. Loyal. Isolated. Grateful. He shrugged slightly. And because you would have done it. You've always been so desperate to belong. To be valued. It's what makes you such an excellent assistant. The casual cruelty of his assessment stole my breath. 5 years of my life reduced to a manipulation. A calculation. You were going to let them cut me open, I whispered. For money. Or a medical breakthrough, he corrected smoothly. The Lazarus drug will save thousands of lives. My investment ensures Everstone remains at the forefront of medical innovation. By risking my life? I asked incredulously. Stephen sighed as if I were being deliberately obtuse. The risks were minimal, and you would have been compensated eventually. That's enough, Dr. Patel interjected. Mr. Dillard, these accusations are extremely serious. If true, they constitute medical fraud, ethical violations, and potentially criminal misconduct. Stephen's expression hardened. You're overstepping, Patel. Remember who runs this hospital? Not anymore, Jake said quietly, pulling out his phone. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. I've already spoken with 3 members who were disturbed by the evidence I've shared. The color drained from Stephen's face. You wouldn't. I'm your father. Jake met his gaze steadily. Yes, you are. Which is why I'm giving you this chance to come clean voluntarily before the police get involved. Stephen's eyes darted to the door as if contemplating escape. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he murmured. No one was supposed to get hurt. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of him any longer. I'm leaving now, I said to no one in particular. I need to get out of here. Jake touched my arm gently. I'll take you home. As we walked out, of the room, I heard Stephen call my name. I paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. I did give you a chance, Vanessa, he said softly. Remember that. I continued walking, Jake's supportive arm around my shoulders, leaving Stephen Dillard and his poisonous hold on my life behind. The days following what hospital staff quickly dubbed the transplant incident passed in a blur of statements, interviews, and uncomfortable meetings. The hospital board placed Stephen on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Margaret Winters resigned the same day, citing personal reasons that fooled absolutely no one. I took sick leave, retreating to my apartment to process everything that had happened. The walls that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed tainted by association. Stephen had, after all, approved my application for the hospital-subsidized housing. I spent hours researching new apartments across town, desperate for a fresh start. Jake called daily, checking in with quiet concern. He never pushed, never demanded anything, simply offered support and space in equal measure. I was grateful for both. The board wants to meet with you, he told me on the 4th day, his voice careful over the phone. They're conducting an internal review of everything that happened. Your testimony would be valuable. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tighter. Do I have to? No, Jake replied immediately. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. But Vanessa, he hesitated. This could help ensure nothing like this ever happens to anyone else. At Everstone. He was right, of course. The thought of facing a room full of hospital executives made my stomach churn, but the thought of staying silent was somehow worse. I had spent years being quiet, accommodating, invisible. Where had it gotten me? I'll do it, I said finally. But I want you there. Of course, Jake promised. Every step of the way. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend alternating between anxious preparation and complete avoidance. May came over on Sunday night with takeout and quiet encouragement. You're doing the right thing, she said, passing me a container of pad thai. Everyone in radiology is talking about how brave you are. I nearly choked on a noodle. Brave? I almost let them cut me open because I was too afraid to say no. May's expression softened. That's not how most people see it. They see someone who was manipulated by the most powerful man in the hospital and still found the strength to stand up in the end. Thanks to Jake, I reminded her. If he hadn't burst in, but he did, May said firmly. And now you have a chance to tell your story. Don't minimize that. The boardroom was intimidatingly large, with a polished oak table that seated 20 and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Greenville. I sat beside Jake, clutching a glass of water with trembling hands as the 12 board members filed in. Most were strangers to me, wealthy donors, retired physicians, local business leaders, but a few familiar faces appeared, including Dr. Patel, who gave me an encouraging nod. The chairwoman, a formidable-looking woman in her 60s named Helena Foster, called the meeting to order. Ms. Brooks, we want to thank you for coming today, she began. We understand this is difficult, but your perspective is crucial to our investigation. For the next hour, I recounted everything, from my initial hiring to the gradual escalation of Stephen's controlling behavior, the aftermath of his collapse, the pressure to donate, and finally, the dramatic scene in the operating room. The board members listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but otherwise allowing me to speak uninterrupted. "Why didn't you report these concerns earlier?" one board member asked when I finished. "Everstone has anonymous reporting channels for ethical concerns." I laughed hollowly. "Those reports go directly to the HR director, Margaret Winters, who reported directly to Stephen. Besides, what would I have said? That my boss was manipulative? That he made me feel uncomfortable? Without concrete evidence, it would have been my word against his." Helena Foster nodded thoughtfully. "The power imbalance made reporting prohibitively risky. We recognize that failing in our system." "It's more than a failing," Jake interjected. "It's a fundamental design flaw. The system was built to protect people like my father, not people like Vanessa." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, surprising me. I had expected resistance, skepticism, perhaps even hostility. Instead, I was met with something that felt strangely like validation. "Ms. Brooks," Helena continued, "we want to assure you that your position at Everstone is secure, should you wish to return. Additionally, we are prepared to offer compensation for the emotional distress and professional disruption you've experienced." I blinked, caught off guard. Thank you. But I don't think I can come back. Not to the same role, anyway." "Understandable," Helena nodded. "Would you be open to considering a different position within the organization? Perhaps something in patient advocacy? Your experience gives you a unique perspective that could be valuable to our reform efforts." The offer was tempting. A chance to transform my trauma into something constructive, to help others navigate the complex power dynamics of healthcare. But the thought of walking through those hospital doors each day, passing Stephen's office, eating in the cafeteria where I'd spent so many anxious lunches, it was too much. "I need a clean break," I said finally. "I appreciate the offer, truly, but I need to find my own way forward." Helena seemed disappointed but nodded respectfully. "The door remains open, should you change your mind. And regardless of your decision about employment, Everstone will provide comprehensive support for any therapy or counseling you might need, as well as a severance package that recognizes your years of service." After the meeting, Jake walked me to my car in the parking garage. "You were amazing in there," he said quietly. "The way you spoke. So clear, so powerful. They really listened to you." I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. It felt good, saying it all. Out loud, like lancing a wound. "What will you do now?" Jake asked, his expression careful, giving nothing away. I took a deep breath, considering. The future stretched before me, terrifying in its openness, but exhilarating too. For the first time in years, my decisions were truly my own. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Find a new apartment first. Then maybe look into finishing my degree. I always wanted to study social work before my father happened," Jake finished wryly. I smiled despite myself. "Yeah, before that." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sounds of hospital life, ambulance sirens, overhead announcements, helicopter landings, creating a familiar backdrop. "Vanessa," Jake said finally, "I know this isn't the right time, but I want you to know that I'm here. Not because I feel responsible for what my father did, although God knows I do feel that way sometimes, but because He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I care about you. And whatever you decide to do next, I'd like to be part of your life, if you want that." The sincerity in his eyes made my chest tighten. Here was someone who had seen me at my most. Vulnerable, who had literally saved me from making a terrible mistake, and who was now offering, what exactly? Friendship? Something more? "I think I'd like that," I said softly. "But Jake, I need time. Space to figure out who I am without your father's influence hanging over me." Jake nodded immediately. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He stepped back, giving me physical space that matched the emotional breathing room he was offering. "Just know I'll be here when you're ready." As I drove home that evening, the weight that had pressed on my chest for years felt lighter. The road ahead was uncertain, the wounds still fresh, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something like hope flickering in the darkness. Stephen Dillard had taken so much from me, my confidence, my boundaries, nearly my kidney, but he hadn't taken everything. I still had my voice. I still had my dignity. I still had my future. And this time, I would build it on my own terms. 3 months after the transplant incident, I stood in the middle of my new apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the faint smell of fresh paint. October sunlight streamed through bare windows, casting golden rectangles on the hardwood floors. The place was smaller than my hospital-subsidized unit, and the neighborhood was farther from downtown, but every square inch of it was mine. Truly mine. I had used part of my surprisingly generous severance package for the security deposit and first month's rent. The rest I'd put toward tuition at Greenville Community College, where I'd enrolled in social work courses for the spring semester. "I think that's the last one," May called from the doorway, setting down a box labeled kitchen in her neat handwriting. She wiped her forehead dramatically. "You know, for someone who claims to be a minimalist, you have a ton of stuff." I laughed, the sound still unfamiliar but increasingly frequent these days. "Most of it's books. I should probably invest in a Kindle." "Sacrilege," declared a deep voice from behind May. Jake appeared, carrying my ancient microwave with surprising ease. Physical books are sacred objects. A pleasant warmth spread through my chest at the sight of him. We'd kept in touch over the past months, occasional texts, coffee every couple of weeks, maintaining a careful distance that was part mutual respect, part mutual protection. Today was the first time I'd invited him into my new space, my new life. "Where do you want this technological marvel from 1997, he asked, nodding at the microwave. "Counter next to the fridge," I directed, watching as he navigated around boxes to the tiny kitchen alcove. Jake had changed since the hospital confrontation. There was a new steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The board had appointed him as an ethics consultant during the overhaul of Everstone's policies, a role that seemed to both burden and fulfill him. "How's the reform going?" I asked as he returned to the living room. Jake ran a hand through his hair, which had grown longer over the summer. "Slow. Bureaucracy is a beast, even when everyone claims to want change. But we're making progress." He hesitated, then added, "Dad's officially resigned, part of his plea agreement." I nodded, absorbing this information. Stephen's downfall had been swift and public. The local paper had run a series of exposés on the Everstone transplant scandal, eventually uncovering other ethical violations stretching back years. Criminal charges related to medical fraud were pending. "How do you feel about it?" I asked quietly. Jake was silent for a moment. "Conflicted," he finally answered. "He's still my father, but what he did to you, to others, it can't be excused." He met my eyes directly. "I don't regret stopping him." "Neither do I said firmly. May cleared her throat. "As fascinating as this ex-boss therapy session is, I was promised pizza for my moving services, and I am starving." I grinned, grateful for the tension break. "Let me find my phone and we'll order." The three of us spent the evening sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, eating pizza straight from the box and unpacking the essentials. May left around 9, claiming an early shift at the hospital, but with a significant glance between Jake and me that made me blush. After she left, a comfortable silence settled between us as we continued unpacking my book collection. "I appreciate your help today," I said, arranging novels alphabetically on the small bookshelf beneath the window. "You didn't have to spend your Saturday moving boxes." Jake shrugged, handing me a dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre. "I wanted to." He paused, then added more softly, "I've missed seeing you, Vanessa." My hands stilled on the bookshelf. "I've missed you too. But you needed space," he acknowledged. "I understand that." I turned to face him fully. I did. I needed to figure out who I am outside of Everstone, outside of your father's influence. I spent so many years molding myself to his expectations that I'd lost track of my own wants and needs. "And have you?" Jake asked. "Figured it out, I mean." I smiled, considering. "I'm getting there. I know I want to finish my degree. I know I want to help people who've been in powerless positions like I was. I know I like this apartment and that I'm terrified of starting classes in January." I took a deep breath. "And I know that I value your friendship more than I can say." Something flickered in Jake's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps? Or resignation. "I value your friendship, too," he said carefully. "But," I continued, my heart pounding, "I've also been wondering lately what it might be like to be more than friends." The words came out in a rush, surprising even me with their directness. Jake went very still. "You have?" I nodded, suddenly unsure. "Unless I've misread things completely, which is entirely possible. I'm still not great at interpreting people's intentions, for obvious reasons." A slow smile spread across Jake's face, transforming his features. You haven't misread anything, he said softly. But are you sure? With everything that's happened, with who I am, you're not your father, I interrupted firmly. You never were. And yes, I'm sure. I've had 3 months to think about it, and I'm sure. Jake set down the book he was holding and moved closer to me, his movements deliberate, giving me every opportunity to back away. I didn't. When he was directly in front of me, he gently took my hands in his. Can I kiss you, Vanessa Brooks? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In answer, I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deepening as his arms wrapped around my waist. I felt something inside me unlocking, a door opening to a room I hadn't known existed. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jake rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since the day I spilled coffee on you, he confessed. I laughed. That long? That long, he confirmed. But I'm glad it happened now. Not then. We both needed to go through everything that happened to get here. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have been ready for this. Too raw, too uncertain, too defined by my relationship to Stephen. Now, I was beginning to stand on my own feet, to trust my own judgment again. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He reluctantly pulled away to check it, frowning slightly at the screen. Hospital? I asked. Yeah, he sighed. There's an emergency ethics consult for a case in the ICU. I should probably go. He looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry. Worst timing ever. I smiled, shaking my head. It's okay, I've got plenty of unpacking to keep me busy. I hesitated, then added, maybe dinner tomorrow? My treat, to thank you for the moving help. Jake's expression brightened. I'd like that. He leaned in for another quick kiss. I'll text you when I'm done at the hospital. After he left, I continued unpacking, a new energy in my movements. The apartment was beginning to take shape around me. Books on shelves, dishes in cabinets, clothes hung neatly in the closet. My space, my choices. Later that night, as I lay in my new bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I thought about how far I'd come since that terrifying day on the operating table. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been panic attacks, sleepless nights, days when getting out of bed seemed impossible. The trauma of what almost happened, what would have happened without Jake's intervention, still visited me in nightmares occasionally. But there had also been healing. Therapy sessions where I slowly unpacked years of manipulation and gaslighting. Support from unexpected quarters. May's fierce loyalty. Dr. Patel's professional advocacy. Even Helena Foster's surprisingly personal mentorship as I navigated my career transition. And now perhaps something new beginning with Jake. Not a rescue or a debt, but a relationship between equals. The thought made me smile. In the darkness. Stephen had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about me. I wasn't desperate to belong, to be valued. I was worthy of belonging, of being valued, just as I was. As sleep finally claimed me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not perfect, not complete, but real. The peace of someone finding their way back to themselves, one step at a time. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, the South Carolina winter holding its breath as Christmas decorations appeared throughout Greenville. I spent my days preparing for the spring semester and my evenings volunteering at New Horizons, a local support center for people transitioning out of manipulative work environments. It had been Jake's suggestion, actually. They're always looking for people who understand firsthand, he'd mentioned one evening as we walked along the Reedy River. You might find it helpful, both for them and for you. He'd been right. My first day at New Horizons had been terrifying. Standing in a circle of strangers, sharing pieces of my story, listening to theirs. But by the end of that session, the knot of isolation that had lived in my chest for years had loosened slightly. These people understood. They didn't judge my silence, my compliance, my fear. They had lived it too. Now, after 6 weeks of regular volunteering, I'd become something of a fixture there. Today, I sat across from Diane, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and nervous hands who had recently left a 20-year career at a law firm where the senior partner had systematically undermined and controlled her. I keep thinking I should go back, Diane confessed, staring into her coffee cup. I don't know who I am without that job, without his approval. I nodded, recognizing the sentiment all too well. That feeling is normal, I told her gently. Your identity was wrapped up in that relationship for so long. But Diane, think about what you've told me about who you were. Before him, the woman who loved gardening and mystery novels. The woman with opinions and dreams. She's still in there. Diane glanced up, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, in her expression. How did you do it? Start over, I mean. One day at a time, I said simply. And with help. Lots of help. I hesitated, then added, have you considered talking to someone professional? Therapy was essential for me. I can't afford it, Diane admitted. Not since I left the firm. My savings will only stretch so far. I pulled out a brochure from my bag. New Horizons has a partnership with several therapists who work on a sliding scale. Some even offer pro bono sessions for people in transition. I slid it across the table. You don't have to do this alone. As I left the center that evening, the director, Marianne, caught my arm. Got a minute, Vanessa? Of course, I replied, following her into her small office. The space was cluttered but warm, with plants covering every available surface and children's drawings pinned to a corkboard behind her desk. Marianne gestured for me to sit. I've been watching your work here, she began. You have a natural gift for this. The way you connect with people, the way you listen, it's special. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched. It helps that I've been where they are. Exactly, Marianne nodded. And that's partly why I wanted to talk to you. We're expanding our services next year, adding more support groups, more one-on-one counseling. We've secured funding for a new position, assistant program coordinator, part-time to start, with potential to grow. She smiled at me. I'd like you to consider applying. I stared at her, speechless for a moment. But I don't have a degree yet. I'm just starting classes. Experience matters too, Marianne interrupted gently. And you have that in spades. The degree will come and we can work around your class schedule. She leaned forward. Just think about it, okay? The formal posting will go up next week. On the drive home, my mind raced with possibilities. A job at New Horizons would align perfectly with my studies, giving me practical experience alongside theoretical knowledge. The part-time hours would accommodate my classes. And most importantly, it would be meaningful work. Work that mattered, that helped people who had been where I once was. I was so distracted by these thoughts that I almost missed the figure sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. Jake, bundled in a charcoal pea coat, his breath visible in the suddenly chilly evening air. Surprise, he said, standing as I approached. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd take a chance you'd be home soon. A lucky chance, I smiled, leaning in to kiss him hello. The easy affection between us still felt novel, exhilarating. Want to come up? I'm making pasta. In my apartment, as Jake chopped vegetables for the sauce and I boiled water for the pasta, I told him about Marianne's offer. That's incredible, Vanessa, he said, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. You'd be perfect for it. You think so? Even without the degree? Absolutely, he affirmed, setting down the knife to look at me directly. Some things can't be taught in classrooms. The empathy you have, the insight into what people in those situations are going through. That's invaluable. His confidence in me still took me by surprise sometimes. After years of Stephen's conditional approval and calculated criticism, Jake's straightforward support was like stepping from a dark room into sunlight. There's something else, I said, turning down the heat under the pasta. I got a call from Helena Foster today. Jake raised his eyebrows. The board chairwoman? What did she want? I took a deep breath. Everstone is implementing a new patient and employee advocacy office. Independent oversight, direct reporting to the board, full autonomy from hospital administration. Helena wants me to come and speak to the planning committee, share my experience, give input on what protections might have helped me. Jake was silent for a moment, processing. How do you feel about that? I stirred the pasta thoughtfully. Conflicted. The idea of walking back into that building, I shuddered slightly. But if my story could help shape something that prevents others from going through what I did, isn't that worth some discomfort? Only you can answer that, Jake said softly. But for what it's worth, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever known. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. We ate dinner on my small balcony, despite the chill, wrapped in blankets and talking about everything and nothing, my upcoming classes, his latest ethics case, a movie we wanted to see that weekend. It felt normal, comfortable, in a way relationships had never felt for me before. Later, as Jake was leaving, he paused at the door. I almost forgot to tell you. I ran into May at the hospital today. She said something about a holiday party at her place next weekend. Are we going? The casual "we" made my heart skip. Yes, I said, smiling. We are. After he left, I found myself thinking about Marianne's job offer, Helena's request, my classes starting in January. So many new beginnings, all sprouting from the ashes of what had nearly been a terrible end. There was poetry in that, I thought. Or justice, perhaps. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Made it home. Already miss you. Dinner tomorrow? I texted back a simple yes, smiling at the screen. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting notes for the Everstone committee meeting. If I was going to tell my story again, I wanted to do it right. Not just recounting what had happened, but offering concrete suggestions for change. 3 hours later, I had a detailed outline and a list of recommended policies. Independent ethics boards, anonymous reporting systems with external oversight, regular psychological evaluations for those in leadership positions, separation of employee housing from workplace authority, whistleblower protections with real teeth. As I finally closed my laptop, exhaustion settling into my bones, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Stephen, not of Everstone, not of my own vulnerability. I had survived the worst they could do to me. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, and now perhaps I could help ensure no one else had to do the same. The apartment was quiet around me, peaceful in its simplicity. On my bookshelf stood a small cactus Jake had given me as a housewarming gift. Hard to kill, he'd said with a wink, and thrives in any environment. It had grown nearly an inch since then, sprouting a tiny pink flower just last week. I touched one of its spines. Gently, careful not to press too hard. Strong enough to protect itself, but still capable of creating something beautiful. There was another metaphor there if I cared to examine it. Outside, the December night had turned cold at last, frost beginning to form on my windows. But inside, I was warm, safe, growing, free. 6 months had passed since I'd moved into my new apartment and started rebuilding my life. Summer heat blanketed Greenville as I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the collar of my navy blue blazer. Today was the day of Stephen Dillard's hearing. Not the criminal trial, which was still months away, but the medical board's formal review of his license. I'd been subpoenaed to testify. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, official and impersonal, requesting my presence at the South Carolina Medical Licensing Board. My testimony would help determine whether Stephen would ever practice medicine or hospital administration again. You don't have to do this alone, Jake had said when I showed him the letter, my hands trembling slightly. I'll be there. May too, if you want. Now, as I applied a final touch of lipstick, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Outside whenever you're ready. No rush. I took one last look at my reflection. The woman staring back at me was both familiar and strange. The same dark hair and brown eyes I'd always had, but something different in the set of my shoulders, the steadiness of my gaze. I barely recognized myself sometimes, in the best possible way. Jake was leaning against his car when I came, outside looking sharp in a charcoal suit despite the humidity. His face lit up when he saw me, a reaction that still made my stomach flutter after 6 months of dating. Ready? He asked simply, opening the passenger door. As I'll ever be, I replied. The drive downtown was quiet, both of us lost in thought. Jake reached over occasionally to squeeze my hand, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. I'd prepared extensively for this day, reviewing documents with the medical board's attorney, practicing my testimony, working through anxiety exercises with my therapist, but nothing could fully prepare me for facing Stephen again. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. A row of 7 board members sat at an elevated table at the front, their expressions professionally neutral. Stephen was already there, sitting beside his attorney. His once commanding presence diminished somehow. He didn't turn when Jake and I entered, but I felt his awareness like a physical force. Ms. Brooks, called the board secretary. Please take a seat in the waiting area. We'll call you when it's time for your testimony. Jake and I found seats near the back. Dr. Patel nodded to us from across the room, where he sat with several other Everstone staff members who had been called to testify. May slipped in moments later, still wearing her hospital scrubs, and took the seat beside me. Sorry I'm late, she whispered. Emergency CT scan. Did I miss anything? I shook my head. Just getting started. The board chairwoman, Dr. Eleanor Reed, called the hearing to order. Today we review the case of Dr. Stephen Dillard, license number 35792, regarding allegations of medical ethics violations, coercion of staff, falsification of medical records, and breach of fiduciary duty. For the next hour, the board heard preliminary testimony from hospital administrators and reviewed documentary evidence. I listened with growing unease as Stephen's attorney attempted to portray the entire situation as a misunderstanding and a well-intentioned procedural oversight. Dr. Dillard's only concern was securing necessary medical treatment in a timely manner, the attorney insisted. Any procedural shortcuts were taken with the best interests of both patient and donor in mind. Finally, my name was called. Jake squeezed my hand one last time as I stood. I made my way. To the witness chair, was sworn in, and faced the board. Ms. Brooks, Dr. Reed began, in your own words, please describe the events leading up to your scheduled kidney donation to Dr. Dillard. Taking a deep breath, I recounted everything, from Stephen's collapse to the pressure from HR, the falsified test results, and the last-minute intervention that had prevented the surgery. I spoke clearly and directly, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. I didn't dramatize or embellish. The bare facts were damning enough. And at any point, asked a silver-haired board member, did you feel you had a meaningful choice in this matter? No, I said firmly. My housing, my career, my professional references, everything depended on staying in good standing with Dr. Dillard. The pressure was subtle but relentless. Stephen's attorney stood for cross-examination. Ms. Brooks, isn't it true that you signed consent forms voluntarily? I signed under duress, I corrected, after being told repeatedly that I owed Dr. Dillard for giving me a job. And isn't it true that you and Stephen Dillard's son, Jake Madsen, are romantically involved? The attorney asked, his tone insinuating. I refused to be baited. Jake and I began dating months after these events occurred. Our relationship has no bearing on what happened at Everstone. The attorney's questions grew increasingly aggressive, attempting to paint me as ungrateful, vindictive, or confused. I remained calm, answering truthfully and directly, refusing to be provoked. Finally, Dr. Reed intervened. That's enough, counselor. Ms. Brooks is not on trial here. As I returned to my seat, I caught Stephen's eye for the first time. He looked older, diminished, but there was still something calculating in his gaze. I held his stare for a long moment, then deliberately turned away. He had no power over me anymore. The hearing continued with testimony from Dr. Patel, who confirmed the falsification of medical records, and from Dr. Walker, who had agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for leniency. Margaret Winters had declined to appear, citing her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. Finally, Stephen himself took the stand. His testimony was a masterclass in careful evasion and qualified admissions. In retrospect, he said solemnly, I recognize that my eagerness to secure treatment may have led to procedural oversights. However, at no time did I intend to put Ms. Brooks at risk. Dr. Dillard, one board member asked bluntly, are you aware that your actions could have resulted in Ms. Brooks undergoing major surgery for a transplant that would likely have been rejected, potentially endangering both your lives? Stephen's composure faltered slightly. I relied on my medical team to ensure compatibility. A team you personally selected and supervised, the board member pointed out. By late afternoon, all testimony had been heard. Dr. Reed announced that the board would deliberate and issue their decision within 30 days. As the hearing adjourned, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. I had said my piece. I had told the truth. The rest was out of my hands. Outside the building, Jake pulled me into a tight embrace. You were incredible in there, he murmured into my hair. May joined us, linking her arm through mine. That calls for drinks, she declared. First round's on me. At a quiet bar a few blocks away, surrounded by friends who had become something like family, I finally felt the tension of the day begin to ease. Jake kept his arm around my shoulders, a steady presence at my side. May regaled us with hospital gossip, deliberately avoiding any mention of the hearing. Dr. Patel stopped by our table briefly before heading home. For what it's worth, Ms. Brooks, he said quietly, what you did today took tremendous courage. Whatever the board decides, you've done a service to our profession. As he left, Jake raised his glass in a toast. To telling your truth, he said simply. I clinked my glass against his, then May's. To freedom, I added. Freedom not just from Stephen, but from all the doubts and fears that had held me captive for so long. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. That certainty, more than anything else, felt like victory. The South Carolina summer faded into fall, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons. 1 year had passed since that fateful day in the operating room, a year of profound change, growth, and healing. I stood at the podium in New Horizons community room, looking out at the circle of faces before me. Some familiar now, some new, all bearing the distinctive blend of wariness and hope that I recognized so well. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice steady and warm. "My name is Vanessa Brooks, and I'm the program coordinator here at New Horizons. This is a safe space for sharing, healing, and moving forward. I'd accepted Marianne's job offer 8 months ago, starting part-time while completing my first semester of classes. When she retired in June, the board had unanimously approved my promotion to full program coordinator. The work was challenging and deeply fulfilling, creating support systems for people emerging from manipulative situations, developing educational programs, partnering with legal resources for those who needed them. After the session, as participants filtered out with coffee and pamphlets, a young woman lingered behind. She reminded me of myself a year ago. Tense shoulders, eyes that darted nervously around the room, hands that couldn't quite keep still. "Ms. Brooks," she said hesitantly, "I was wondering if I could talk to you privately sometime about my situation." "Of course," I smiled, immediately recognizing the courage it had taken for her to ask. "I have time tomorrow afternoon, or Friday morning. Whatever works for you." Relief washed over her face. "Tomorrow would be great. Thank you. It's just the way you described your experience with your former boss. It sounds so much like what I'm going through with the partner at my law firm, and I don't know how to—" She broke off, eyes filling with tears. I touched her arm gently. "I understand, and you don't have to figure it all out at once, Rachel. The first step is just acknowledging what's happening. You've already done that, which is huge." After she left, I gathered my materials and checked my phone. A text from Jake. "Board decision came in. Call me when you can." My heart skipped. After months of deliberation and delays, the medical board had finally ruled on Stephen's case. I stepped outside and called Jake immediately. "Hey." His voice was gentle but excited. "Where are you?" "Just finished at New Horizons. What's the verdict?" "Permanent revocation of his medical license," Jake said, "and a formal recommendation to the Hospital Association that he be barred from any administrative role in healthcare settings." I sank onto a nearby bench, a complex wave of emotions washing over me. Not triumph exactly, but vindication, justice, closure. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked after a moment of silence. "Relieved," I said, honestly. "It won't undo what happened, but it might prevent it from happening to someone else." "That's exactly what the board chairwoman said," Jake replied. "Your testimony was pivotal, Vanessa. You made this happen." I thought about Rachel, about all the others who came to New Horizons with similar stories of manipulation and control. "There's still so much work to do," I sighed. "And you're doing it," Jake reminded me. "Every single day." He paused. "Are we still on for dinner tonight? I have some news of my own." "Absolutely. I'll be home around 6. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something nice." I smiled at his mysterious tone. "Should I be suspicious?" "Deeply," he laughed. "See you at 7. I arrived home with just enough time to shower and change into a forest green dress I'd bought on a shopping trip with May last month. Jake arrived precisely at 7, looking handsome in a suit I hadn't seen before. His eyes widened appreciatively when I opened the door. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning in for a kiss. "So do you," I replied, straightening his tie. "What's the occasion?" His smile was enigmatic. "You'll see." Jake drove us downtown, eventually, pulling up to the newly renovated Greenville Botanical Gardens. I looked at him curiously as he led me through the entrance and down a lantern-lit path toward the central pavilion. "Jake Madsen," I said suspiciously. "What are you up to?" He just smiled and squeezed my hand. The pavilion came into view, glowing with string lights and filled with people. As we approached, I recognized familiar faces. May and her boyfriend, Dr. Patel and his wife, my classmates from GCC, colleagues from New Horizons. A banner hung above the entrance. "Congratulations, Vanessa." I turned to Jake in confusion. "What is this?" "Your acceptance came in the mail today," he explained, eyes shining. "To the BSW program at Furman, full scholarship." I gasped. I'd applied to transfer to Furman University's Bachelor of Social Work program months ago, never expecting to receive the prestigious Collins Fellowship that covered full tuition. But how did you know? And how did you arrange all this so quickly? Jake grinned sheepishly. I may have been checking your mail, and I may have had this planned for weeks, just waiting for the letter. Tears pricked my eyes as May rushed forward to hug me, followed by a wave of well-wishers. The evening became a blur of congratulations, champagne toasts, and shared laughter. At some point, Helena Foster appeared, elegant in a simple black dress. I had a feeling you were destined for greater things than hospital administration, she said warmly. Everstone's loss is society's gain. Later, as the celebration wound down, Jake led me to a quiet corner of the garden. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees around us, and the autumn air was crisp with possibility. I'm so proud of you, he said softly. Watching you rebuild your life this past year, seeing your strength and resilience, it's been inspiring, Vanessa. Truly. I felt a flush of pleasure at his words. I couldn't have done it without you, I admitted. You showed up at exactly the right moment. Speaking of moments, Jake said, suddenly looking nervous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. Jake, I'm not proposing, he said quickly, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver key. Not yet, anyway. But my lease is up next month, and I thought maybe, if you wanted, we could find a place together. He rushed on, words tumbling over each other. Something that's ours, not mine or yours. A fresh start for both of us. I looked at the key, then at Jake's hopeful face, feeling my heart expand with joy. 1 year ago, I had been on an operating table, about to sacrifice a part of myself for a man who saw me only as a means to an end. Now I stood beneath a canopy of stars with a man who saw me, truly saw me, and loved what he saw. Yes, I said simply, taking the key and closing my fingers around it. Let's build something new. Together. Jake's smile lit up his face as he pulled me close. Over his shoulder, I watched our friends chatting and laughing. People who had supported me through the darkest time of my life and now celebrated my brightest moments. The journey from that operating table to this garden had been long and often painful. There had been therapy sessions where I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, nightmares that left me gasping in the dark, days when the weight of what had almost happened threatened to crush me. But there had also been moments of profound grace. May's unflagging friendship, Jake's patient love, the face of every person at New Horizons who found their voice after losing it for so long. What are you thinking about? Jake murmured against my hair. I pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. That they were wrong, I said. Stephen, Margaret, all of them. They said I owed him my life. But the truth is, I owed myself the courage to say no. Jake nodded, understanding immediately as he always did. And now? Now, I smiled, feeling the solid weight of the key in my palm. I owe myself the courage to say yes. To everything that's mine to claim. My education, my work, my future. I reached up to touch his face gently. My heart. As we walked back toward the pavilion, hand in hand, I thought about how life's most profound journeys often bring us full circle. 1 year ago, I had lain powerless under hospital lights, about to give a part of myself away. Tonight, I stood, tall beneath the stars, gathering all the pieces of myself together at last. They had told me I was the only match for a transplant I didn't need to give. They had said I owed him, that he gave me this job, that I wouldn't be where I am without him. They never asked how I felt. They never wondered why my boss had collapsed. They never cared that I was trembling, suffocating, on the verge of giving. A part of my body for a man who used to make me cry behind locked doors. But I had survived. I had thrived. I had reclaimed my power, one day at a time, one choice at a time. And that, in the end, was the truest transplant of all. The restoration of my own beating heart back where it belonged. In my chest, in my life, in my hands, mine.